continue. So you should all have gotten a notice, right? That this is being recorded. Cool.
Correct, yeah. It's recording now. Yeah.
All right, it's recording. Cool.
Okay, should I start?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. Hello, everybody from my side too. I'm Sigrid Schmitz, and I worked until December last year at the Humboldt University of Berlin. Now I'm in Cologne. And I would like to introduce to you Sofia Varino, who is currently a postdoctoral research fellow working with the, and now I have to read, minor COSMOPOLITANISMS research training group in the Department of English and American Studies at the University of Potsdam. And Sofia's research focuses on the role of embodiment and materiality in the history of biomedical knowledge production, with a current book-length project considering the implications of racial and environmental justice movements in genealogies of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sofia researches and teaches on science and technology studies, environmental philosophy, visual culture, and queer and feminist studies, and feminist materialisms, I want to add, because this is also in the Master Gender Studies program of the Center for Transdisciplinary Gender Studies at the Humboldt University, where we met first, I think 4 years ago. It's, I think, more than 4 years ago.
Yeah, something like
so
that.
So there we came into touch and found a lot of knitting points to discuss further.
That's right.
From her various publications, I would like only to mention a special issue in Somatechnics, together with Lida Malich and Lotte Fiedel from 2019, which had the title Data Matters, in brackets, undoing data and gender in the life sciences. And the second publication I want to mention is from 2017, a book on vital differences, indeterminacy, and the biomedical body. And I think this touches not at least to the prosthetic body, which is her talk today on cyborg corporealities in Cherrie Moraga's play Heroes and Saints. And I think the lecture has been pre-recorded, so I would like to ask everybody who wants to ask questions to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I thought the internet was instead. To put questions, or at least your name with a question mark, in the chat, and I will try to moderate the order of questioning after the a recording of the talk, as I think that is the best thing, not to interrupt the talk. So, Sofia, I'm very much looking forward to your talk, please.
Thank you, Sigrid. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, no, go ahead, Sigrid. Yeah, okay. So yes, I have pre-recorded my lecture just this afternoon. Because I have a feeling my internet might not cooperate, in which case then Julia will play the video of the lecture. But fingers crossed, maybe everything is going to be just fantastic. So while I play the lecture, you're going to see 2 images of me. If that's too strange, you can just minimize the video of our Zoom chat. And yeah, like Sigrid said, as you have questions that pop into your mind, you can just put an exclamation mark into the chat, or just write your question or comment in the chat if you prefer. All right, so I'm going to start by sharing screen. I rehearsed this before, so it should go very, very well. View, enter, full screen. Okay, here we go. And the lecture is just over half an hour. So I hope it's enjoyable for you. I will minimize this as well. All right, like this, you actually don't have to see both Or maybe you do anyway. No, not like this. You see 2 images of me, but not 3. Okay, here we go.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your introduction, Sigrid. I am going to start by sharing my screen. I have a PowerPoint to accompany my presentation, and I will also be reading from a paper. So I hope the rustling of my notes is not too much of a distraction for you. So thanks for being here, everybody. I'm going to be talking about prosthetic embodiment and cognition in the play Heroes and Saints by Cherrie Moraga. I want to start by just making very clear that I am not a classicist. So this lecture series has been conceptualized as a way to examine and explore prosthetic embodiment and cognition in classical antiquity and beyond. So I'm part of the beyond, along with other scholars like Margaret Childrick. I'm part of the beyond in this lecture series. So I am going to be mostly focusing on the character of CERE or CEREZITA in the play. The play explores themes of disability and environmental justice, focusing on real events that took place in California during the 1980s. I'm going to read from Linda Greenberg's description of the play because I think it's just so succinct and thorough. And the image you see here is from a scene in the play where CERE joins with other people from her town, the fictional town of McLaughlin, based on the real town of McFarland, where these events took place. And she joins with others protesting against the widespread use of pesticides in farming practices, particularly in the vineyards in her community. So this is from a 92 production by El Teatro Mission in San Francisco in 92. So more or less citing Linda Greenberg here, Heroes and Saints depicts a Mexican-American farming community whose children and adults are dying due to the agriculture industry's reliance on pesticides. While the adults also experience pesticide poisoning, the play focuses on the sick and dead children as the most visible sign of the community's loss. CERE, or CEREZITA, is represented as one of the earliest cases of pesticide poisoning. She was born with a head but no body after her pregnant mother worked in the contaminated fields. Now approaching adulthood, CEREZITA is a consummate reader and commentator on the diseased and dying community that she watches from her window and experiences in her home. So I've been teaching and writing about this play for quite some time, and I think the reason why is that it encapsulates many of the themes that fascinate me in my work, particularly environmentalism, disability, death and dying, and of course, technological interventions on embodiment. Here you're going to see some of the key themes that I'll be talking about during this lecture. So of course, the prosthetic, commonly understood or assumed to be belong to the artificial, to the category of the artificial. I'm also going to be talking about non-human agency, nature, ecology, and of course, plasticity. And we can, during the discussion, talk more about all of these themes and how we want to open them up or use some of what I'm going to say next to open up these large, wide encompassing concepts and practices. So to give you some more information about the play, it focuses on themes like I already touched upon of environmental racism and disability justice. The two images you see there are one of the playwright, Cherrie Moraga, to the left, and to the right, another production of the play in the early 90s. So the play is based on real events, like I already mentioned, a cancer cluster that occurred between 1978 and 88 in California in the San Joaquin Valley, the McFarland farming community. So what occurred was that due to chemical exposure, there was a case of pesticide poisoning from the pesticides used in the vineyards, which had a particularly drastic consequence for women's reproductive health, especially in terms of pregnancies, with very many cases of childhood leukemia, a total of 20 dead children due to cancer during that decade, which is much, much higher than the usual rates. So that's why it's called a cancer cluster. So in the way I'm reading this play today, aside from focusing on environmental racism and disability justice, I'm also going to argue that Moraga created a play in Heroes and Saints that explores the limits of prosthetic embodiment and cognition. So some more context for this play. It's been widely studied, written about in medical and environmental humanities, disability studies, and theater and performance, particularly eco-theater, which is sort of a subgenre of performance focusing on environmental issues. It has been produced by various independent companies throughout the 90s in the US, particularly the West Coast and the Bay Area. It includes many references to Chicana culture, theater, and literature, particularly magical realism. So we can think of CERE as a non-realist character, or even anti-realist character. And there are also many references, of course, to Catholicism, as you can see in this image, also from the 92 production. The play is influenced by the documentary by the United Farm Workers, The Wrath of Grapes, which precisely documented what was happening at the time in the US throughout the 1980s in the community of McFarland. And Moraga has indicated that what prompted her to write the character of CERE was precisely the image of a child born without limbs due to pesticide poisoning, who was featured in the documentary. So CERE is a non-realist character, like I already mentioned, and Talora Davis in 2006 writes about the possibility of engaging with CERE's disability as a metaphor, disability as metaphor. And yet, in its dramaturgy and the production of the play, very many issues that pertain to disability accommodation, especially on stage for disabled performers, disabled audiences, all these themes come to the fore during the production of the play, because it is necessary to find a way to accommodate a performer who is going to be placed on this moving platform, which is the only way that CERE can move on stage. Of course, this is adjacent to the theme of this talk, but it was non-disabled performers who were cast to perform the role of CERE. These are just some keywords that the play is classified under from the NYU School of Medicine. So you can see there cancer, children, cross-cultural issues, disease and health, freedom, public health, racism, suffering, survival, technology, and of course, women's health. So I'm going to read directly from MORAGA'S notes on CEREZITA and ask you to try to picture, try to imagine, try to have a feeling for this character and how you might encounter this character on stage or in some sort of imaginary fictional space you might create for it. So these are MORAGA'S notes in the play script towards future production of the play. CEREZITA is a head of human dimension, but one who possesses such dignity of bearing and classical Indian beauty she can, at times, assume nearly religious proportions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The huge head figures of the pre-Columbian Olmecs are an apt comparison. The image, however, should be contrasted with a very real humanness. And here I'm emphasizing, highlighting in bold what I consider to be some of the most thought-provoking words in this description. The very real humanness she exhibits on a daily functioning level. Her mobility and its limits are critical aspects of her character. Her mobility and its limits. So I'll be talking more about that, and we probably will as well during the discussion. So the notes on CEREZITA continue, and this is an image from a different production of the play. For most of the play, CEREZITA is positioned on a rolling table-like platform, which will be referred to as her ride. So ride is a sort of Spanish pronunciation of the English word ride. It is automated by a button she operates with her chin. The low hum of its motor always anticipates her entrance. Always anticipates her entrance. The ride can be disengaged at any time by flipping the hold on each wheel and pushing the chin piece out of her reach. At such times, CEREZITA has no control and can only be moved by someone manually. At such times, CEREZITA has no control. Okay, so here I want to start introducing some of the themes that interest me in terms of agency. So I'm going to be calling it here a kind of prosthetic agency. And we can discuss more about what I might mean by that, or what you might understand that to be. So there's the agency, of course, of the right, the rolling platform that CERE uses to some extent as a body, which allows her to move and to interact with others. So that we can consider whether that is a kind of non-human, post-human, or becoming almost human object / prosthetic / mechanism. Then we have CERE's head. So here I'm engaging with already with Sigrid Schmidt's ideas about the brain body. So CERE's head, which is extensively referred to throughout the play, in terms of her tongue, her hair, how beautiful and long it is, her chin, her face, her voice, how all of these, and particularly her tongue and her chin, have to perform a lot of bodily actions. So they have to find a way to act in the world as CERE. And then, of course, the agency, the capacity to act the pesticides themselves, which poison the air and the water supply and cause birth defects and cancer in the community, also through exposure while working in the vineyards. So there's a great deal of attention paid to how pesticides cause chemical injuries and cause chemically originated disease in the community. And I want to think here of how the pesticides themselves already have a sort of prosthetic agency in how they act upon the body and become extensive, and how the body is permeable to the pesticides themselves. So moving along to start considering CERE as a cyborg, and here I want to use this idea of visibility as metaphor, but also visibility as very much an embodied experience and condition that can be limiting, but can also provide a limitless capacity to do things in a different way. So I want to propose a kind of parallel or analogy or metaphoric relation between CERE and HARAWAY'S cyborgs, and to propose that we are all inherently prosthetic and cyborg. And this is something that the character of CERE allows us to see quite clearly, because as an anti-realist character, she allows us to kind of detach and defamiliarize certain kinds of bodies. So we have a different way of encountering CERE's body. And the image to the right is from the cover of HARAWAY'S book, in which the Cyborg Manifesto was first published in book form. And I think we can see some similarities there in pattern and aesthetics. And of course, the two are from are close in date. So just a quick overview of HARAWAY'S cyborg theory, the Cyborg Manifesto from 1985, which was then followed by the Companion Species Manifesto, and both to some extent focus on ideas of multi-species kinship, so relations and companionship across species. HARAWAY has a lot of ideas about the non-human as a kind of what I'm calling a depository of psychosocial imaginary, encompassing the affective, the sensorial, the mythic. And of course, in the Cyborg Manifesto, a lot of attention is paid to these kinds of human, animal, machine assemblages, and the hybrid liminal forms of embodiment that are going to be politically, socially, culturally disruptive. They're going to unsettle our species' expectations. And for HARAWAY, part of her interest is in these unexpected couplings between organ and prosthetic. And that's also how the Cyborg Manifesto has traveled and been received and studied and taught since its publication. So I will read, trying to avoid too much rustling. I'm going to read from my notes and say as well that I have written about this play in various contexts, from bioethics to performance studies. And so here I will offer a kind of analysis that engages with HARAWAY'S ideas, but also with concepts of neuroplasticity and the brain body, or the embodied brain and the brain body, as proposed by Sigrid Schmitz, who's here with us, Victoria Pitts-Taylor, and Elizabeth Wilson. A female head born without a body due to a congenital condition caused by chemical exposure to pesticides CERE is plausible as a cyborg figure, I argue, insofar as hers is an apocalyptic world where the organic and the mechanical have merged in a convoluted relationship. In her environment, ancient agricultural practices and the industrial production of pesticides merge and collide to formulate a hybrid kind of embodiment, constituted by a post-human head and by the rolling platform to which she is bound and entirely dependent on, not only for movement, but also for social interaction. Because the right is what allows us to be at a height that makes interaction with other people a little bit easier. Functioning both as device and as organ, the mechanism interrupts our species' expectations to postulate a hybrid corporeality from which CERE can perform the cyborg task of conflating nature and culture, the human and the non-human. I want to consider CERE as a post-human figure whose very presence destabilizes the notion of agency as based on control and autonomy. Reading MORAGA'S play in relation to HARAWAY'S Cyborg Manifesto allows me at least, to consider themes of environmental and disability justice embodied by CERE. This might be partly because HARAWAY'S, an explicitly feminist text, just as MORAGA'S, serves to highlight the aspects of heroes and saints that resist the nature-culture dichotomy of a patriarchal paradigm, as well as the environmental exploitation necessary for the economic model of capitalism, destabilizing neat separations between body and mind and questioning our current understanding of agency in terms of autonomy and control. Of course, disability justice and environmental justice movements, as well as farm workers and other labor movements, have also repeatedly denounced precisely this dichotomy and exploitation, energized by intersectional feminist politics. Writing about her 1985 manifesto in the Companion Species Manifesto from 2003, Haraway reflects on how in the Cyborg Manifesto she had, and I'm quoting here, tried to write a surrogacy agreement, a trope, a figure for living within and honoring the skills and practices of contemporary technoculture without losing touch with the permanent war apparatus of a non-optional post-nuclear world and its transcendent, very material lives. End of quote. Significantly, just as Haraway's text opens meanings in MORAGA'S play, so does the play come to illustrate and amplify the concepts advanced in the manifesto, bringing them into concrete manifestation. It is thus a pleasure to read one text against and into the other, particularly because CERE does not necessarily come across as an obvious cyborg at first. She is not constructed as a character to fulfill that role, nor is she navigating the sort of technologically saturated urban ecosystems that Haraway's cyborgs might seem to inhabit. On the other hand, if cyborgs bring together the human and the non-human, the organic and technological, nature and culture in unexpected ways, and here I'm quoting Haraway again from 2003, then CERE can certainly qualify as one, especially if we think of cyborg embodiment as the result of couplings between organism and machine. As an entity, CERE is constituted both by her head and the rolling table-like platform to which she is bound. Her dependence on this apparatus for mobility, as well as its final transformation into an altar with the roses of Tepeyac imprinted upon it, a reference to Guadalupe and the Virgin Mary, both signal towards its ambivalent function as device and as organ. By bringing to the foreground the fundamental importance of our bodies as agents in the political sphere, both CERE and Haraway's cyborgs effectively denounce and cancel the Cartesian distinction between body and mind that has pervaded Western thought and upon which oppositional distinctions between the human and the non-human depend. Of course, neither Moraga in 92 nor Haraway in 1985 could have predicted the level of environmental awareness many of us would be forced to possess today, nor the spectacular lack of effective strategies to translate them into a coordinated response. The lessons learned from either text, I argue, have much to do with a feminist ethics of vulnerability as agency, of visceral cognition and affect, and of the brain, mind, head as visceral themselves. So here I'm turning to thinking more explicitly about the prosthetic head, or CERE's prosthetic head, as brain body. And I want to ask the question, what happens when a head becomes a body? What does this allow us to think in different ways? So I'm engaging with Schmidt's concept of brain body, Pitts-Taylor and brain's body, and Wilson. And all these writers are thinking of the brain as distributed, right? So in the case of Wilson, distributed neurological and biochemical networks, particularly at the level of the gut. Schmidt's focusing particularly on cognition and cognitive prosthetics, and Pitts-Taylor thinking about neurology and the neurological circuits in social and political theory. I want to think about the organs, the organic and the visceral body as a kind of continuum in relation to the prosthetic, usually considered to be the artificial body, and what we might be able to do with that continuum, or with thinking with organ and prosthetic, not as opposing categories, but as mutually constitutive. And I want to question also the idea of artificiality itself, so we can think of it in terms of plasticity, performativity, materiality. And here, of course, I'm already gearing towards our discussion, and thinking also about the post-human body. CERE's post-human body as radically altered by pesticide use and agricultural biochemical interventions in nature. And thinking of the prosthetic head, the brain body, I also want to pay special attention to CERE's tongue, because it's kind of one of the main characters. It's another character, another actant in the play, and particularly in scene 8, act 1, CERE turns to Father Juan and asks him to look up the definition of tongue in the dictionary, and very many kind of a cluster of words come up, including, of course, language and speech. And the speech here becomes the speech of disabled, racialized, and gendered bodies. I'm going to just very quickly read what CERE says to Father Juan. Think about it, Padre. Imagine if your tongue and teeth and chin had to do the job of your hands. And there is some sexual innuendo to the speech. You know, turning pages, picking up stuff, scratching an itch, pointing. I mean, your tongue alone would have to have some very serious definition. For me, well, it's my most faithful organ. And then she tells him to look it up in the dictionary, the word tongue. So this, my most faithful organ, the tongue, located in the head, functioning as an organ, as part of the brain body, as an agent of language and speech. I find this very, very productive for trying to consider prosthetic embodiment and cognition. So in conclusion, I want to consider the various themes of the play in relation to the idea of prosthetic ecologies. And here I'm including themes of environmental racism, so which bodies are affected and in what ways by the various actants. present in any given environment. I'm thinking about aspects of prosthetic extension and enhancement, so how the prosthetic body is extended into the lived environment. And as you saw, thinking about HARAWAY'S cyborgs, and thinking about the brain body and how we might use the character of CERE and other similar cyborg characters for considering, for reconsidering, for challenging classical Western divisions between human and non-human, mind and body, and especially nature and culture, always going back to that foundational division. And then I want to bring in the political potential, the epistemological potential of the concept of liminality. So the limits of what bodies can do, where does the prosthetic object, so something like the platform, the right, begin, and where does the body proper, the organs such as CERE's tongue, end, and how these two interact. So turning to ideas of liminality. And finally, as we come closer to the discussion, I want to ask, what might we gain or lose by considering all forms of embodiment and cognition as inherently prosthetic? Thank you very much. And I will return to our live discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Sophia, for this talk. There's not so much still in the chat. I'm not astonished if everybody is as fascinated from this talk than I was. So I'm just talking a little bit to give the others the time to just, if you don't have to formulate a question, you only have to give a little sign in the chat. I've seen there is already one. So we can then start with questioning. So thank you very much. And we have a first, I think, voting for questioning. Yanis, I give the word to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Sophia, for your very interesting talk. I hope you can hear me now. Yeah, okay. Yeah, my question is, I was thinking about the kind of prosthesis that you've been using during your talk, or that's actually my question, if you would say this was a prosthesis in terms of HARAWAY, because we all using Zoom, and you used the prosthesis of recording your talk, so it was actually a prosthesis of a prosthesis. And my question is because Paul Preciado says actually that this kind of social networking and using email and so on, they say that it is kind of a prosthesis, but would you agree? Or is it actually classicism to say, okay, Zoom is our prosthesis, but if we are still, I mean, I think, as I expected during my whole life, I'm an able body, and so I feel a little bit troubled if I say Zoom is my prosthesis, but at the same time, I'm also vulnerable to Corona. So if I would, but I would say that it's not kind of a disability, because that would make me very uncomfortable. But at the same time, I think this question is kind of interesting. So how would you consider that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Thank you, Yanis. Well, I would say that Zoom is most definitely a prosthesis. It is prosthetic. Its function is prosthetic. And I most certainly experienced that today as I suddenly decided to record my lecture. And as I worked around it and now found a way to make it play for you, all of it, the sense that I get from it is that it is most definitely prosthetic and working with Preciado's ideas as well, whom I almost included in my talk today, because I really like their approach to the prosthetic, which includes the architectural. So it goes beyond just thinking about embodiment or in any kind of corporeal experience. It includes thinking about our environment and our architectural ways of inhabiting space. So I quite like their approach. And I would say, in terms of the question you raised about able bodies and disabled bodies, I would like to say that the prosthetic is not by any means only for someone who has a disability, right? And or you might think that someone has a disability, but they don't actually consider themselves disabled in any way. So although they use something that we very easily classify as prosthetic on a daily basis to move or to perform any kind of activity, they don't see themselves as being disabled in any way. In fact, they think of their prosthetic embodiment as enhancing their lives. So I think that it's useful to consider different levels of privilege and how privilege is an energy-saving device, to engage with Sarah Ahmed's delicious definition of privilege. But I think it's important to universalize more the idea of disability. So to some extent, many of us experience disability, at least in some aspect of our lives or during some period of our lives. And how we use prosthetics, how we relate to the prosthetics that surround our daily lives. I mean, I don't think that's determined by how disabled we feel or don't feel. You know, I don't want to turn it into something that's too deterministic. I think everyone has to have a sense of whether they are or are not disabled and in what way. And I think that changes a lot throughout time. So yeah, but I don't know, what does everyone else think? I think this is a really productive question. Do you experience Zoom and this increasing digitalization of our lives as a kind of prosthetic? Because I would say I experience it as prosthetic because I experience it as very much embodied. It affects my body in all kinds of ways. So that would be my answer. But I don't know, what do other people think? I mean, are we thinking about prosthetics more as material devices, or do they include digital conceptual devices?
There is another question in the chat, but before I would like to continue a bit. It's also that you're definitely right. The question of with the term of prosthetics, we can bring in the perspective of discussing, are we all disabled or will be disabled, and so on. On the other hand, it's a bit difficult when it comes to the question of the Zooming, because I think it's also important to differentiate, because not all cyborgian perspectives, may it be a trope or a fact, are in the sense of prosthetics. It's also a question of the term, which is interpreted often as a helping device connected with disablism. But the question is whether Zoom for us is a prosthetic, but maybe not all the time, but it is perhaps always a cyborgian embodiment. So I think this is a little bit of differentiation, which would be interesting to add. I think that the worth of the term prosthetic is what you explained so precisely, Sophia, that it opens up for another part of the discussion on disablism.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm also wondering now, I mean, I'm sitting on a very comfortable chair where I usually sit almost every day, and I have my chair here. And I mean, all of these, I think, and my laptop are, to some extent, they feel to me, to some extent, as prosthetic. So they perform a prosthetic function, and they are also culturally produced. I mean, we are supposed to be sitting, right, in a certain way, to be more or less upright. I mean, I'm not sitting on my couch as I might be if I was just chatting with a friend. So there are a lot of cultural conventions as well that come into our practice in Zoom. And yeah, I do think that the way we use prosthetics is so much part of our lives that we kind of take them for granted, and we don't think of them as prosthetic anymore just because they're so familiar, right? They feel like a kind of continuation of our bodies. But sorry, there's a question by someone else. So
yeah, I can read it if I understand it right. Sophie Emilia Seidler, that because she showed that she cannot turn on the video or audio, so I would write it. I think it's refers to the last question on your slide. This might be the most obvious classicist question, but can it be a coincidence, that's so great, that the protagonist of a play about agriculture, environmental justice is called Ceres, CEREZITA, if we think of Ceres, the goddess of agriculture? So this is the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's
getting linked.
Yeah. That's definitely not a coincidence. That is a very deliberately MORAGA'S choice, and it's. I mean, I think it resonates for many of us. But I love this question because it's already going into that classical culture direction, which, you know, it's always good to have those kinds of discussions. That's why I'm excited about this lecture series. I'm hoping for the classicists to open up all kinds of meanings. But yes, that is very very much a deliberate choice. Yeah, at least that's what Moraga has indicated.
But to go back to Sofia Emilia question, why do you think, Sof, this is the case? Why she has why she's carrying the name of the goddess of agriculture? I mean, why she has chosen this such a culturally pregnant name?
Yeah, I think Moraga tends to do that in her work. So she uses she's very interested in you know, events that are part of news, that are part of social injustice that's occurring in the moment. But then she tries to bring in a very mythical dimension to her work. So I think very deliberately she would have chosen the connection to the goddess of agriculture. Also because in the play, if you ever read it or if you manage to watch it on stage, there are a lot of references to religious imagery. So from Catholicism, but also other kinds of rituals, or there are lots of ritual functions that the character of CERE ends up performing. And towards the end, there's kind of a very religious moment when the platform turns into an altar with the roses of Tepeyac on it. So it's like this, a reference to a miracle that occurred, and that occurs in that moment on stage when CERE kind of takes on a mythical dimension in a more explicit way. So I think that Moraga throughout her work often engages with religious imagery and with this kind of, you know, more classical themes. And she's also very influenced by Greek theater. So she tries to write in the tradition of this kind of epic theater, more so than realist theater, for example. Yeah. So I think it has a lot to do with that. But yeah, I think the religious themes in the play are really fascinating. I didn't touch upon that so much, but they're definitely there. And Haraway, of course, also has that famous sentence, "I would rather be a cyborg than a goddess." Yeah.
Then I got the end of the manifesto, in fact. Yeah.
Are there further questions from the plenum or in the chat. I would like to ask something, just waiting a bit if there's someone else. No. Referring to the notion of humanness. And this is for me a connection, this question between, you characterized CERE as a post-human figure. And if I take this in the post-human sense, or this post-human objective of decentering the human, this is the one side. The other side you mentioned, I hope I got it right, that one aspect of the play is the question of humanness and the limits of humanness. I'm not quite sure whether I got it via technology. And connecting this to the question of how humanness or non-humanness is always ascribed and in a discriminatory way to disability, or non-humanness to disability. For me, the question is it a play about whether or where is the limit of cyborganism to humanism? When is this person not human anymore? This is a very famous debate within all this, not post-humanist, but transhumanist debates. One has to differentiate, but nevertheless, yeah. What is the meaning of humanness, or why is this humanness so in central in this network of cyborgian technology, disability, with all the ascriptions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for Moraga, like when I was reading from the notes describing the character of CERE, for Moraga, it's really important to emphasize the humanness of CERE, and that is how the character is performed on stage. So there's this kind of, there's this likability, there's this sense that CERE is someone that's very relatable. So CERE is imbued with all these traditional human qualities. But I think, and this is where I probably would be perhaps in disagreement with Moraga. I think that what's really interesting about the character of CERE is precisely, well, first of all, that it's an anti-realist character. So it's not possible for a human being or other kinds of mammals to survive with only a head, right? But it is possible to be born without limbs and survive for an extended period of time. So this kind of impossible embodiment that that Moraga creates in the play, for me, that's what's really fascinating. And of course, it makes me think of post-humanism and post-human theories, but I think it actually, I think it goes beyond that. It just really makes us think, what can bodies do? What are the limits of what bodies can do, right? And the fact that often people with visible disabilities are kind of pushed away, and that happens to CERE throughout the play. She's not allowed to leave the house. If she does, it's going against her mother's rules. So she's kind of protected from the community. She's not allowed to participate, to be moving around freely, although she's able to, using the platform. So all the different ways in which people with visible disabilities are then relegated to the category of the non-human. I think that's played out really well in the character of CERE. So although I'm interested in theories of the post-human, as we have discussed many times, they have a lot of limitations, and they come with a lot of assumptions from a very long Western history.
I just would like to give the word. There are two questions, and if it's okay, I think we are at the end of the time, but if we can take them.
So yeah, I see
Moana Baker, you wanted to, I hope I spelled your name right.
Yes.
The question, and there is another from Gabriela. So first, yeah.
and also Baltip.
No, he.
No, just to go. Yeah. Sorry, I misread. Excuse me. Yeah.
I'm actually handing over to my partner Claude here, who has a question for you, Dr. Sofia.
I'm the imposter. I just kind of, just as a little funny note, every time you kept saying CERE in that in your lecture, I kept thinking CERE, and I kept thinking, why are you talking about iPhones? And that made me think of the detached woman's voice who is in service of someone, or who is kind of, who doesn't really have any agency, or maybe sometimes does, because there's some funny jokes that are being put into her memoir sometimes, so you can make CERE be funny, but she's kind of made into what she is. And so I feel like maybe that could open up some interesting perspective on what you've done on CERE already so far, but that is just because it made me laugh. But I guess that kind of links to technology around us and how we are cyborgs, and you kind of said that we are already cyborgs, and I agree with you that they are, that these, like keyboards and being on Zoom all day is an embodied practice, but for me personally, it's kind of an out of body thing. Like, it makes me feel out of body, but that's at the same time, I guess, an embodied experience. But then my question then is, long story short, is if we are already cyborgs, what's the vision? Because I did feel that Haraway had a vision for, okay, if we are cyborgs, that's how we can bring in together different species. We can build a more equal world, or maybe a utopia of some kind. And if we are already cyborgs, that doesn't feel quite utopian to me. And so where do you see that happening?
Well, I think Haraway tends to be a very utopian author, which is probably why I don't love her work as much as I wish I did. But yes, I mean, I think I don't see our cyborgian embodiment in quite the same utopian way that Haraway does for the most part. So for Haraway, being a cyborg, and we also have to contextualize it. She starts writing about being about cyborg embodiment in '85. For Haraway, being a cyborg is someone that, like you said, can give us more equality, more justice. It's something that's kind of has an equalizing effect socially. I disagree with that. I don't think that's the case at all. I think that we just are becoming more and more cyborgian. We probably have always been using all different kinds of prosthetics. We just didn't think of it that way necessarily. I'm not particularly hopeful or utopian about it. I think it's just a fact that this is how we live our lives, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. So I don't share the utopian aspect of Haraway's thought, or of post-humanism in general. I think it's just a fact that we share the world with other species, with all kinds of objects. We are constantly experiencing our embodiment and our out-of-body being as prosthetic, but I'm not very hopeful about it. I think all the injustices will continue to be perpetuated through all our prosthetic cyborg embodiment, sadly.
Bobby has another question.
Yes.
I don't know, when you describe, Sophia, the play and the figure, I always thought on Stephen Hawking. And,
yeah, me too.
This kind of brain body, and also, as I feel it, that he is produced as a saint, as a genius saint, and so how this could happen, in which way somebody is constructed as a saint, if he has to use these prosthetic brain body figure or what else? It's not a question, but it comes in my mind. Also, what makes somebody to a saint?
I think that's one of the more problematic aspects of the play, and a lot of people have written about it. This kind of, I mean, the way that CERE becomes this kind of divine creature, and I mean, that's still projecting a lot of the non-human onto someone whose embodiment is different, right? So this is an assumption that since you are having to bear the weight of difference, therefore you are not quite human, and then we are either going to completely make you invisible and not interact with you, or you have to become superhuman, right? You have to be a saint, you have to be a genius. In the case of CERE, she ends up performing the function of being the savior of her community, because she is the one who begins a large protest. That's one of the first images I showed in the PowerPoint, when she's protesting with other people from her community. So this kind of expectation or projection that if you are differently embodied, you should be above or be able to perform in a superhuman way. And that's also part of what's problematic about posthumanism, right? Like the ways that prosthetic enhancement are supposed to make us more than human, go beyond the human. But yeah, thanks for your comment, Gabi. That's a really good point. There's also...
We're absolutely over time, but I think there is maybe one short question, short answer. Sofia.
Sorry, I didn't know we were over time. Yeah, I was thinking about the utopian or non-utopian in Haraway's thought, and I think that there's something else in the way that Haraway envisioned the cyborg, which was what you'll like the liminal, and it wasn't just a merging of human and non-human, of human and prosthetic. It was a general blurring of boundaries, liminalities, everything that comes with it. And then, like you said, the problematics of posthumanism is when it goes into these territories of capitalist utopias, of hyper-productivity, and all those things. But I think there's something a little bit dangerous when we employ the prosthetic metaphor, like subject says, on disabled bodies, because then we position the cyborg as something that is complete, and then the disabled body is something that is incomplete. And I've also read some criticisms from disability and creep theory scholars that are a bit uncomfortable with being the embodiment of a cyborg that is so entangled in these fantasies that have been taken up in a very capitalist way of like productivity and functionality and hyper-productivity and hyper-functionality. So I also find that I share a little bit. I wonder if we can think of the cyborg differently, go more towards the liminal and the blurring, and less towards the improvement, enhancement, more.
Yeah, I would hope for that. I hope that I try to go in that direction more. But I do agree that it's highly problematic to project cyborg corporealities or prosthetic embodiment onto specific visibly disabled bodies. I think that, like I said, we are all living in prosthetic cyborg times. There's no way out of it. Yeah, and I'm familiar with that critique from creep theory. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, so thank you all for your questions. I just would like to make one short sentence in advocacy of the Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto, which, besides the neoliberal problem of cyborgian framing, is that the greatest part of the Cyborg Manifesto is not about the utopia, but is about the danger of a informatics of domination.
Yeah, exactly.
System of control. So this is forgotten a lot of time because it's not only a positive scenario.
But
it's only that it's not only, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's more than 30 years old, and so we have to rethink the terms, and this is, I think,
but I think
definitely clear.
Yeah. But in HARAWAY'S latest work, there's still a great deal of utopian thinking. So there's still a great deal of hope. I always think it's from living in California. Everything is so beautiful, and the sun shines every day. So you're just, inherently more hopeful. I think it has to do with that.
Exactly, and there are problematic figures of kinships and so on. Okay. Thank you very, very much, Sofia, and thank all of you for joining. And so I think back to Julia for the goodbye.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. And we will see each other in 2 weeks' time. In fact, the 3rd of February is again a Wednesday. So feel free to join again if you have time.
So next week we'll have Margaret Childrick, right? Next week, 3rd.
No, today is the so it's Wednesday, the 3rd of February. I don't know. It is already next week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Sorry, I got lost. Yeah, then it's next week on Wednesday, exactly in 7 days. Yeah.
All right. So hope to see you here. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Sigrid, for moderating. Bye.
Thank you so much, Sigrid.